Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's, this very clear expectation of precision. It operates almost like engineering.
Right, it's very binary.
Exactly. I mean, you fall off a bike, you break your arm, the x-ray shows that stark, jagged white line, and the doctor just points at the screen and says, well, there it is.
The bone is broken, or the bone is intact. There's no in between.
Yeah, and honestly, it's comforting. We really crave that visibility. We like things to be categorized neatly so we can, put a cast on them and just move on.
Oh, for sure. But then you step into the realm of psychological burnout, and that changes completely.
Right. You hit a wall, you experience that total paralyzing exhaustion, and suddenly the x-ray machine is entirely useless. We're looking at a diagnostic landscape that is just completely murky.
It's the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters.
Yeah.
And because we can't see a literal fracture on a screen, we just immediately assume the ambiguity itself is a sign of our own personal failure.
We assume we are the problem.
Exactly. We internalize it entirely.
And that's exactly why we need to completely reframe how we understand burnout. So welcome to today's deep dive. We are pulling from a really brilliant, dense excerpt from a Substack post today.
Yeah, it's titled Episode 549, Reading Between Worlds, Rupture is Information.
Our mission in this deep dive is to completely flip the script on breakdowns for you. Instead of seeing these moments purely as failures or, moments of weakness, we're going to explore how they actually function as crucial, undeniable data points.
It really requires a fundamental paradigm shift in how we view our own limits.
It does. I want you, the listener, to think about a time you hit a wall in your personal or professional life, like a moment of complete shutdown where you just couldn't physically or mentally do the thing anymore.
We've all been there.
Right. And in that exact moment, did you instinctively blame yourself for breaking? Because, most of us do. But the core thesis of our source material challenges that immediate reflex.
It does, yeah. The author makes a really profound observation right at the start. They argue that the systems we live and work in usually name the rupture itself as the problem.
Like the moment you stop being productive.
Exactly. The moment you stop producing, that's the crisis.
Yeah.
But the text suggests the exact opposite. It says the rupture is not the beginning of the crisis at all.
Wait, I want to stop right there because we really need to unpack that mechanism. We are so conditioned to believe that the day we can't get out of bed or the day we snap at our partner and walk out is the day the crisis began.
Right, the inciting incident.
Yeah. So if the rupture isn't the beginning, what exactly is happening leading up to it?
Well, the author states that the rupture is simply the point at which the crisis becomes impossible to continue falsifying.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a massive distinction. The crisis isn't that you broke today. The crisis has been happening for months, maybe even years. Today is just the day you lost the biological or psychological capacity to pretend that things were okay.
Impossible to continue falsifying? That completely shifts the timeline of the breakdown. You're expending an immense amount of energy just falsifying your reality to keep the peace.
To keep the paycheck, to keep the relationship intact, all of it.
Precisely. We have to look at why we falsify in the first place. Falsification is a survival mechanism, right?
It is. We do it to maintain our position within an arrangement. But there is a heavy internal cost to maintaining an unsustainable status quo.
And the text has a really specific way of describing that cost, doesn't it?
It does. It describes this breaking point as the relationship you can no longer maintain without becoming illegible to yourself.
Becoming illegible to yourself, that's just such a haunting way to phrase it.
It really sticks with you.
It's like messy handwriting you can't decipher anymore, but applied to your own identity.
Yeah, and what it actually looks like in practice is just this long series of micro-compromises. Like to stay in a certain corporate environment or to meet a specific familial expectation. You have to continually suppress your own boundaries and your own values.
You're constantly twisting your shape to fit a container that wasn't built for you.
Exactly. And over time, that distortion becomes so severe that you literally do not recognize your own internal signals. You are illegible.
It makes me think of an analogy. Imagine you have a deeply personal document. Let's say it represents your core identity, your native emotional language, your actual needs.
Okay, I'm with you.
But to survive in your environment, you have to translate it. You translate it into corporate speak to please a manager.
Right, softening the edges.
Yeah. Then you take that translated document and you translate it again to accommodate the emotional immaturity of a friend.
Oh, wow.
And then you translate it a third time to meet the expectations of your family dynamic.
And with every translation, you just lose syntax. You lose nuance. You lose the original meaning entirely.
Exactly. If you run a sentence through 5 different languages in a translation app, by the time you translate it back to your native tongue, it's complete gibberish.
It makes absolutely no sense.
Right. You have made yourself illegible just to keep all these external arrangements intact. I mean, think about it. Have you ever looked at a commitment in your life or an email you just typed and realized it no longer makes any sense in your own native emotional language?
It feels like someone else is operating your hands.
It really does. And that feeling of alienation is the true crisis.
Because the crisis was happening the entire time you were translating away your identity.
Exactly.
You were in crisis when you sent the email. You were in crisis when you took the promotion. You were in crisis when you agreed to the boundary violation.
The rupture is just the moment the translation software finally crashes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Your brain and body simply refuse to compute the gibberish anymore.
But if this collapse is essentially a massive system failure, like a moment where we literally lose the ability to translate our own lives, I really have to push back on how our culture handles this.
Oh, the cultural response is fascinating.
Right. Because the moment we have that total collapse, modern pop psychology loves to swoop in and slap a beautiful Instagram filter on it. We frame burnout as this sort of hero's journey.
We absolutely do. The whole phoenix rising from the ashes narrative is everywhere.
Yes, you scroll through social media, and every breakdown is framed as this necessary cocoon phase. Like, oh, the universe is just forcing you to level up.
Or your breakdown is just a breakthrough in disguise.
Exactly. It feels like we're desperately trying to romanticize the fact that we just hit a concrete wall at 80 miles an hour. Why do we try so hard to paint our burnout as a hero's journey?
Well, it's a coping mechanism, really. But the source material aggressively rejects that romanticization.
I noticed that. The author's very strict about it.
Extremely.
Mm.
They explicitly warn against the tendency to view breakdowns as beautiful awakenings. They state, I do not want to romanticize collapse, but I also refuse to pathologize it too quickly.
Let's dig into that refusal to romanticize, because I think a lot of people lean on that pop psychology narrative as a life raft. Why is the author so firm about not making this poetic?
Because treating a systemic collapse as a mystical journey minimizes the sheer destruction it actually causes.
It belittles the pain.
Exactly. The text is very firm on this. Collapse is not inherently wise. Burnout is not a mystical initiation.
Shutdown is not glamorous or cute.
No, not at all. When we romanticize it, we actually insult the very real suffering of the person going through it.
It's almost a form of toxic positivity. By forcing a narrative of beautiful growth onto a collapse, we deny the person the right to actually grieve what they're losing, and they are losing a lot.
They really are. The source material grounds us in the tangible, severe consequences of these ruptures. The author notes that there is nothing poetic about losing access to one's capacities, one's work, one's words, or one's sense of continuity.
Losing your words. Just losing your cognitive capacity to process a basic conversation. I mean, that is terrifying, not beautiful.
It's horrifying. The text specifically lists what is at stake here. It brings up real grief, real loss, real fear, and very harsh practical consequences.
Because these things don't happen in a vacuum.
Right, they happen in a capitalist society.
Mm-hmm.
A rupture can cost a person their livelihood. It can cost them their housing, their friendships, their entire professional identity.
And it can take years of slow, painful rebuilding to recover from an unsustainable arrangement snapping.
Exactly. This is such an important correction to the narrative. Burnout isn't a long weekend at a self-care retreat where you take bubble baths and do yoga.
No, burnout is looking at a single email in your inbox and feeling your heart rate spike to 140 beats per minute.
It's literally not being able to get out of bed to do the job that pays your rent, and the terror that comes with that reality.
We really have to face that real grief instead of dressing it up in poetry.
We do. But this is where the text asks us to hold two opposing ideas at once. Yes, the author strips away the romance and forces us to look at the severe destruction of a collapse. But remember the second half of their statement.
The part where they also refuse to pathologize it too quickly.
Right. They won't call it a beautiful breakthrough, but they also won't just label it a sickness, hand you a pill, and tell you to get back to work.
Because if we just pathologize it, if we just say, well, your brain broke, you are malfunctioning, we completely miss the utility of the event.
And that brings us to the core mechanism of the source text. If the rupture isn't a poetic awakening, and it isn't just a random personal malfunction, what is it?
The text gives us a really clinical, objective answer. It's a diagnostic tool.
The diagnostic value of the break. I love this framing because it completely removes the moral weight we usually attach to failing.
Yeah, the text notes that if we only read rupture as a failure, we miss the fact that the break happens precisely where the arrangement had already become unsustainable.
The collapse is the proof of the unsustainability.
Think about how a structural engineer looks at a physical collapse. Let's say a bridge suddenly gives way under the weight of a heavy commercial truck.
Okay, good analogy.
When the investigators arrive, they don't look at the rubble and say, wow, this bridge was morally weak. It just didn't have enough willpower to stay standing.
Right, they don't blame the bridge's character.
No. And they also don't say the truck broke the bridge.
No, they analyze the structural stress.
Exactly. They look at the microscopic fractures in the concrete that have been expanding for 5 years. They look at the rusted rebar.
The crisis was the slow degradation of the material.
Yes. The truck driving over it was just the final, undeniable data point that the load was too heavy for the compromised structure.
In that engineering scenario, the collapse itself is the data. The rupture is just the bridge communicating, in the only way the laws of physics allow, that the arrangement of weight and material was fundamentally unsustainable.
Which maps perfectly onto the human experience outlined in our source material. If you snap at work, or you find yourself physically unable to continue a relationship, you haven't failed.
Your system has simply provided diagnostic data.
Your body is the bridge,
Yeah.
and it's telling the engineers, hey, this load is exceeding our structural capacity.
This is how we begin to shift the mindset. For anyone who has hit that wall and felt immense guilt for breaking, the diagnostic approach changes the direction of your inquiry.
It really does.
Instead of asking inward, why am I so weak that I couldn't handle this? You start asking outward, what was the unsustainable arrangement I was forcing my biology to maintain?
You stop judging the break and you start objectively analyzing the load.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You stop judging and start analyzing.
That is incredibly freeing, but, it does introduce a massive contradiction that I think we need to resolve.
What's that?
If the load was so incredibly heavy and the microscopic fractures were building up for years, why on earth did we keep driving trucks over the bridge? Why do we routinely ignore our own structural degradation until the moment of total collapse?
Because we are actively conditioned to ignore the degradation. We don't just individually decide to push past our limits in a vacuum. We do it because the environment we operate in demands it. And this brings us to the final, and arguably most profound, revelation in the source material. It traces the root cause of this unsustainable tension to a massive ongoing conflict between our physical reality and our societal narratives.
And the text drops this absolute hammer of a sentence to explain this conflict. It says, the body breaks where the social story has stopped making sense.
The body breaks where the social story has stopped making sense. The author explicitly notes that this sentence matters. It's the thesis of why the rupture happened.
It explains the exact mechanism of the breaking point.
It really does. It's a battle between the somatic reality of your nervous system and the intellectual lies you've absorbed from your culture.
We really need to define the social story. What is it, practically speaking? Because it sounds a bit abstract, but the text shows us how insidious and specific it actually is.
It's essentially the invisible water we're all swimming in.
Yeah, it's the cultural script that tells us what success looks like, what a good employee looks like, what a good parent looks like.
And it is incredibly powerful because it masquerades as objective reality. The text points out that the social story maintains its power by whispering two very specific lies to us.
It constantly reassures us by saying, you're doing fine, and this is normal adult life.
This is normal adult life.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Think about the sheer weight of that phrase.
How many times this past week have you excused your own exhaustion, your own underlying misery, or your own illegibility by simply telling yourself, well, this is just normal adult life?
It's the ultimate thought-terminating cliche. It is designed to stop you from questioning the system entirely.
Exactly. It weaponizes our desire to belong against our own well-being. The social story tricks us into normalizing our own destruction.
It really does.
You're working 60-hour weeks, you haven't slept properly in months, you're completely disconnected from your partner, your stomach is constantly in knots from anxiety, but you look around and the social story says, hey, look at everyone else.
Everyone is tired. Everyone is stressed.
You're doing fine. This
Yeah.
is just what being a responsible grown-up entails.
And because we're social creatures, your conscious mind accepts that narrative. Your mind says, okay, the system says this is normal, so the problem must be me.
I just need to push harder.
Right. I need to practice more resilience. I need to optimize my morning routine so I can handle the load better. Your mind is completely complicit in the falsification.
But your body doesn't speak the language of the social story. The body doesn't care about hustle culture. It doesn't care about the economy or your title or the expectations of your peer group.
The body only speaks the language of biological reality. It speaks in cortisol levels, in heart rate variability, in nervous system regulation.
So while your mind keeps falsifying the crisis, forcing you to keep translating your needs into gibberish to stay legible to the system, your body is keeping an exact objective score of the structural stress.
And eventually that discrepancy becomes too large. The body looks at this absurd, punishing arrangement. It looks at the social story that claims chronic exhaustion is normal, and the biology simply vetoes the narrative.
The body just says, no. This has stopped making sense. I don't care what the social story says. We are shutting down the power grid.
That physical veto is the rupture. It is your body refusing to be an accomplice to the social story's lie for one more second.
Your intellect might want to keep pretending, but your biology pulls the emergency brake.
And that ties everything together perfectly. That is the ultimate diagnostic value we were talking about earlier.
Because the rupture isn't just telling you that you are tired. It is telling you exactly where the social story is a lie. The break points directly to the falsification.
It forces a confrontation with reality that you can no longer intellectualize your way out of.
So let's synthesize exactly what we've unpacked from this incredible source text today. A rupture, whether we call it burnout, a breakdown, or a collapse, is incredibly painful.
It is unglamorous. It can be financially and relationally devastating.
But we have to stop viewing it as a sudden, shameful failure of character. It's simply the undeniable end of a falsified existence.
It is the moment your physical biology steps in and forcefully rejects a social story that no longer makes sense for your survival.
The structural crisis was already there, hidden in plain sight by the social story. The rupture just finally brought the data into the light.
Exactly. The collapse is the data. It is information demanding to be read.
Which leaves us with a rather profound and, frankly, somewhat unsettling implication to consider as we wrap up.
Yeah, we've spent this entire time applying the source material's diagnostic lens to the individual.
We've talked about what happens when a single person's biology rejects the social story that tells us chronic exhaustion is just normal adult life.
But if we zoom out, the diagnostic data scales up. Think about it. If our individual physical bodies are breaking down because they are serving as the diagnostic tools for a fundamentally broken social story, what happens when enough individual bodies break at the exact same time?
If mass burnout is the data, what is it diagnosing about the whole structure?
Exactly. Makes you wonder, does the social story itself eventually experience a rupture? Does it reach a point on a collective societal level where the crisis of how we are living becomes impossible to continue falsifying?